Hello, and welcome to the Church of God Network podcast. My name is Chantel Reynolds. I am one of the hosts here on the Church of God Network podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, we talk about all things Church of God, community, and relationship building here. So today I'm incredibly excited because I'm joined by this gem of a human, Debbie Caudle. Thank you so much for being here, my friend.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. So today I specifically brought Debbie on because not only is she's got some great perspective, but she's also a trained therapist. And we are going to be tackling the discussion of um, general trauma, specifically in relationship to splits, like the 1995 worldwide split, other subsequent splits, and how that can affect both individuals and people on a community level. And then hopefully how we can work towards healing one step at a time. So, Debbie, hello again.
Big topics.
I know it is a big topic, but I'm excited about discussing it. But before we get into it, I want to kind of talk about you a little bit. If you would share who you are, a little bit more your background, and what led you into becoming a licensed therapist in the first place.
Okay, well, so I've been doing this I'm in my 31st year of working as a therapist. And you know, I didn't start off in college on this path. I went to Ambassador. I was going to be a teacher. I come from a line of teachers. I changed my major 3 times. But in the summer of between my junior and my senior year at college, I read this book. Well, I guess to back up, I was always this person that everybody would come talk to, like people a lot older than me. And I could never figure it out. Like, why are they talking to me? And the only thing I could really figure is, I guess I'm just really good at listening. But the summer after my junior year, I read this book on art therapy and I was super intrigued by it. Art therapy is this very, very specialized form of therapy that's used in working with children. I don't do art therapy, but that made me very intrigued to find out more about that sort of general line of work. So I came back my senior year of Ambassador. I was in Big Sandy. That was the year of consolidation, where they closed the Pasadena campus and brought everybody from Pasadena to Big Sandy. So that was my senior year. And they offered actually a handful of psychology classes, like introduction to counseling. And so I took as much as I could. I actually ended up with what could be considered a minor in psychology. I ended up with 18 credits. And that was the beginning of the beginning. I went on to do my master's in Texas, and I've never looked back since. And I've been in private practice full-time since 2005 in various locations. But yeah, so now everything I do is virtual, which is great. I get to work from home. So
That's awesome. Yeah. And so you have a very interesting perspective because you were essentially in like the midst of all of the craziness during the worldwide split in 1995. You were literally in campus and you were a student there. And I've talked to many people. I have family members and people in my life who, while they were there, that it ended up being so overwhelming and traumatic that they ended up just leaving the faith completely. And I think it's very interesting talking to people from so many different perspectives and how, some people like yourself, you were in it, but you ended up staying. So tell me a little bit about that. Yeah. Walk me through kind of what that was like for you.
It was really traumatic. And what's interesting though is I wouldn't have used that word at the time, but looking back retroactively, I can go, yeah, it really was traumatic. So I was newly married, literally. Actually, the infamous sermon that was given by Joseph DeCoch on was like 4 days before my wedding.
Mhm.
I had just turned 26. But I remember being surprised, by a lot of things that he said, but I had no way of knowing what it was going to actually sort of devolve into. The day that was the most traumatic for me was it was close to spring holy days. And, I'll never forget that Sabbath because the pastor at the time, Dave Haver, got up and he started speaking to the congregation. And he was saying things like, we need, some of you are going to walk out today. And, that's not the way to do this. And as he's talking, a deacon or somebody on sound was heading over to the sound system, and you could watch all this happening. You could watch a man walking over to the sound system to talk to another man. Another man comes out on the stage and hands Mr. Haver a note. Mr. Haver's voice sort of breaks up and he says, "Please don't do this." And you come to find out later that they were going to turn the sound system off on him. He actually wasn't meant to give the sermon. He came out and sort of preempted the minister who was going to give the sermon, and he was really sort of trying to speak to the congregation and say, don't walk out. And I remember just thinking, what is going on? And there was this knot in my stomach, and after church, I became so aware of how polarized people were on this issue. There'd be little factions of people over, in different areas talking, and you'd go stand with one group and realize, oh, they're on this side of this issue. And then you go over here and, oh, they're on that side of the issue. And it was really emotionally overwhelming because I grew up in an era of the church where, we always talk about the church. And there was only one church, and it was synonymous with the organization, Worldwide Church of God. And everybody there had been called out of the world and to come into this church. I was 3 when my parents came in the church, and I'd never known anything different. I'd gone to Ambassador. I, I grew up in Vancouver, BC. That was headquarters for Canada. We had 800 people in our church area. We had a ginormous youth group. Back then it was called YLU. It was all I knew. And I had gone through elementary school being bullied by kids and even by teachers for, this church, this belief system. And I had held on through all of that. And so to watch my church being split in half and 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 see what was going on was just it was earth shattering for me. The decision to leave Worldwide came maybe a month later. I think this was like a month before spring holidays, because I remember I was in Tyler, Texas with my husband. We were there for like the first holy day. And the sermonette was about how much freedom we had now to eat whatever we wanted, and we didn't have to, follow the food laws. And I just felt this burn inside of me, like, this is wrong. This is not biblical. And I informed my husband that day that I wasn't going back to Worldwide. And so I said, I'm going to stay home and I'm going to restudy everything I believe. And so he, I think reluctantly, but said, okay, yeah, I'll do the same thing. And then, in that time frame, United basically formed, or it was beginning to form. And I don't know if they had the name United yet, but so the day or two before Pentecost, so I stayed home that whole month. That the day or two before Pentecost, I yet again informed my brand new husband, I'm going to this new group for Pentecost. So he said, well, I'm going to go too. And he told me later, I didn't know that day, but he told me later that as we drove by the campus, the big sandy campus, he felt sick to his stomach. He felt disloyal.
Mm.
But then we got to where this new group was meeting, and we walked in, and there were all these friends. His own brother was there, and it was like, oh, we've come home.
Mhm.
And so my parents didn't go that path. They
Yeah.
actually left before us. They went with global. So it's interesting because the trauma didn't end for me there. The
Mhm.
trauma got a lot worse because
Yeah.
my parents were very upset that we went to United. And for a number of years, I dealt with a lot of conflict between my dad and me, which was the first time I'd ever really experienced that with him. Where, whenever we visited them, anytime he had me alone, he would ask me questions about the church,
Mhm.
and it would turn into this heated, me feeling defensive and him getting really, really
Yeah.
angry. So I had to deal with that. And that was
Yeah.
also completely unexpected and really hurtful and
Mm.
damaging. And we worked our way back from that. My dad learned to we not bring up religion. I had to put some pretty firm boundaries around that and just say, I
Mhm.
love you, but we're not going to talk about that. Um, but I mean, that affected my health, it affected our relationship. It was really tough. And you
Yeah.
don't expect that. My youngest sister stayed in Worldwide for
Mhm.
9. Well, my middle sister left the church years before the Worldwide split, but my youngest sister, she stayed in Worldwide for 9 years.
Wow.
So she went through some very similar things with my parents. But I always had a pretty good relationship with her. So I would try really hard to not hit on any of those things. She came to United 9 years into,
Mhm.
after the split, and now she's in Cagua. But that's what happened. When
Mhm.
that initial split happened, it splintered everybody.
Yep.
I don't know of any one person that wasn't impacted either directly or indirectly by that.
Mhm. Yeah. And that was one of the most traumatizing thing for people is how much I think it, like you said, just fractured families essentially. And it caused so much division in the place where it should be the safest, your family, not only in your physical blood family, but your spiritual family. And I think just kind of, I'd like to dive into that a little bit, maybe even from kind of like a macro level. Like, what does that look like from the top down? How things like that trickle? You know what I mean? Like from the leadership all the way down into like an individual and a family. Let's talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, so, there are two basic types of trauma. There's acute trauma
Mhm.
and there's chronic trauma. So what happened, I think, in 95 was acute, right?
Mhm.
It was a ripping apart of an organization that many people, it was their world, was their life, and the tearing of that, as you just said really well, is it fractured families. And the thing about splits in a church is that the decision to split is made from the top down.
Mhm.
It's an administrative decision. In the case of what happened in Worldwide, it was really patently obvious to everybody that the doctrines had changed in the church,
Mhm.
and yet there was still a faction of people who felt that they needed to stay in Worldwide because God had put his name with that organization. So what happens in trauma, if you we're familiar with the trauma responses when we think about a trauma like a car accident, something like that, or an assault. But if you think about those trauma responses, you can apply them in the same way to what happened in the church. So you've got your fight, your flight, your freeze,
Mhm.
and even a less known, a less researched response is fawn. So fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And there are even other variations of that they go into. But you can see those responses in what happened, right?
Mhm.
So when something like this happens, some people get very angry. And some people decide, I'm done with organized religion, and away they go. Some people, they're fighting for what they believe. That might be the way the fight looks. But that starts at the top down. I mean, a split can't happen in a church unless the organizational leadership decides we need to go our separate ways. So the way that people respond to that in a lot of ways mirrors what they see happening from the top down. So if and this is not black and white stuff. So,
Right.
we can speak in generalities, but in that situation in 95, it was really evident to the membership. It was really, really evident that Worldwide was going to completely change its belief system and move 180 degrees different. And so each individual member had to decide for themselves what they were going to do. And the leadership themselves had to decide that. I mean, it was traumatic for the ministry too. Their world was completely torn apart as well. And none of us knows what happened behind closed doors with administration. Undoubtedly there were personality conflicts in there that arose out of that, but it was a very black and white doctrinal split.
Mm-hmm.
What I see happening now with other splits, even the one with Caudle United, is that it was less apparent to membership why that split happened.
Yeah.
Some of us had maybe more inside information than others. We had some close friends in the ministry, so we had lots of discussions with them, but it was less apparent to the membership. So what do you, in that moment, what do you do? So some of what happened in that split was decided at the congregational level.
Right.
We like our pastor. He's a great pastor. It's a peaceful congregation. I don't really see the clarity of why this split happened. I'm going to stay where I am. Others didn't like their pastor and may have decided to leave for that reason. And you can see one of the things that happens in a situation like this, and I think a split like this, is it begins to erode trust. In the first split, people who sort of fleed organized religion, some of them believed like, this is just, this is why organized religion is a waste of time, right? Because this is the kind of thing that happens. So I'm out of here. But now, as you see more and more splits, with some people, you see this erosion of trust. Like, I don't even know why these decisions were made. And part of the reason why we don't know all of that is because they're trying very hard to keep things confidential.
Yeah.
Right? There are decisions that were made, things that happened that, they don't want to go around and for lack of a better word, slander or gossip or, so now it's left for the membership to discern for themselves. And that can be tougher to do. It can be tougher to discern those things when there seems to be less obvious reasons for a split. So that makes it even harder for a person to go through that and to go through it a second time. Or in some cases, maybe they were in another organization before they came. I mean, some people went from Worldwide to Church of God, International to United to Caudle. I mean, there's various paths that people have come to whatever organization. My parents went from Worldwide to Global and now to Living. So, and that's pretty typical. So you've got this erosion of trust in the ministry. Not everybody, but some people. Yeah. Some people now have sort of this internal belief system of you don't get to tell me what to do. They just, that lack of wanting that ministerial authority over them.
Mhm.
Other people, and some of this is generational too, Chantel, because the way my parents' generation handled the split and the way they feel about the church and the ministry varies from my generation. And
Mhm.
certainly I see even with millennials and younger,
Yep.
I see a completely different perspective.
Yep.
So there's that aspect to this too.
Definitely. Yeah, 100%. I think it's so interesting because, like, I was born in 93, so I was 2 when the
Yeah.
95 split happened. I don't remember Worldwide at all. It was kind of one of
Yeah.
those things. It was, talked about a lot. It was like the golden glory years. I grew up watching my dad on the Young Ambassadors being like, "Oh, I wish I could have gone to AC," and I was a little drama and acting nerd, so singing nerd, so I just
It
thought
would
that
have
would
been
be
right up your
the
alley,
most fun
Chantal, let me
thing
tell you.
ever.
You would have ate it
Um,
up.
I would have loved it. So it's funny, it's like that's my perspective of Worldwide. It's just this, oh, it's
Yeah.
those are the good years, those were the good times, that's what people
Yeah.
talked about a lot. And I was very blessed to be raised in the congregation that I was in. It was Fort Worth in Texas, just the most wonderful,
Yeah.
loving congregation, full
Yes.
of life, had wonderful friends. Just, I adored my childhood and growing up. And it was a bit in a bubble, I think. Because that's not the norm where you have a lot of
No.
people your age and a lot of activities going on. And so
Yeah.
in a weird way, I think I kind of still got to experience probably what people in Worldwide experience to an extent, because there was a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
of connection and fellowship, and we had, basketball weekends and volleyball and just all these different events all the time. So it was very like connecting, and Bible studies, all kinds of different stuff. We had speech club growing up when we were teenagers. And so in a funny way, I feel like very disconnected from a lot of people who are my age, and they didn't really get to experience something like that. I think they weren't as maybe uh I don't know, it could have gone either way, right? Either because they didn't have as much connection in that way, they had to really prove it to themselves and ground themselves in it, or they built connections like outside of the church and then they ended up leaving once they got to a certain point in their life. So,
You know,
anywho, it's just
one thing that I would add that I just thought of when you said that is also a person's individual experience, like your generation, was also impacted by what your parents experienced going
Mhm,
through that first initial split, right?
absolutely.
So the attitude that your parents had affected the way they raised you to think about
Mm,
church authority and the purpose of the church and your own role in the church. Well, imagine being a child growing up post 95 split. And
mhm,
if you were raised by, you know, parents who split up, who divorced,
mhm.
mom or dad stays in the church and the
Yeah,
other parent leaves. Okay, how does that affect the way you view the church? Or your parents stay together, but there's just this seed of resentment that's been
mhm.
planted, or the seed of distrust, because you had this big, vibrant community that
Yeah,
grew up in, but most people's church areas were sliced in half
yep.
or by three-fourths. I mean, my church in Vancouver, I wasn't living there anymore, but it literally went from 800 people down to like 20
Yeah.
that
Wow.
my parents went from, into global, there was like 20, maybe 30 people.
Mhm.
That's shocking.
Yeah.
And now, and it was a lot of elderly people. So
Mhm.
now, if you're a young person in the church, you've got nobody to interact with, or
Yep.
very few people to interact with. So it changes your life in multiple ways.
Yeah, most definitely. I think it obviously getting older
Yeah.
and building relationships with people in all different organizations has been one of the most beautiful things for me because I think I was a little bit naive growing up.
Yeah.
I was also homeschooled, not saying there's nothing wrong with homeschooling, but I do think that that added to the bubble a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, and so it is so interesting talking to people from all these different walks of life who came from the same, general source trauma,
Yeah.
acute
Yeah.
trauma, and yet have all kind of come, we've all grown in such different ways and we all have such different paths that we've gone, and all the different ways that we've dealt with it. And I think that's something that is so important to recognize, that there was no one right way to do things. I think a lot of times people can get really like, okay, well, this was the only way and we had to do this. And it's hard to understand for someone else that might not have been right for them. I think a lot of times we get into the mindset of, oh, if there's just this black and white, one way, this way or that way. And if you don't go my way, then we can't, we can't converse with one another. We can't be friends. And I think that can become very destructive, um, and also erode trust over time, because I've seen that a lot, where people have struggled to get past that. Like if you
Yeah.
didn't go, let's say, kind of like
Mhm.
what you were talking about with your family, like if you didn't go with global, people chose to, because it was already, um, around before worldwide. I'm sure there were people
United.
who were
Yeah.
like, what are you doing? We're already here. Why are you starting a whole
Yeah.
nother church and fracturing even more? You know what I
Right.
mean? And like,
Yeah.
and I'm sure with people who are, with United, we're like, oh, I didn't even think
Yeah.
about that, and that we're just trying
Yeah.
to make sense of the chaos and what's going on and get together. And so it's just, you know what I mean? Like there was just so much all going
Yeah.
on and people have so many different emotions.
Yeah. I think for me, I can only speak for myself. The first split was absolutely necessary. There
Mhm.
would have been no way for us to all abide under the same roof.
Right.
I mean, that just wasn't going to happen. But one of the things that does happen when you have a split, I mean, sometimes we don't speak to each other because along with what we believe to be doctrinal, there are of course personality conflicts. I mean,
Mhm.
those things are integrated. You can't you can't disagree with somebody about something so fundamental without it, sort of again devolving into, you know, the way we're fighting about this is not helping the situation either. So
Mhm.
we have to agree to disagree, and that means we have to part ways.
Yeah.
But another thing that really just happens is just sort of a natural thing is, what brought us all into the church was our calling and God's spirit. But you know as well as I do that there are a lot of people in the church that the only thing that connects them is that
Mhm.
they wouldn't have necessarily been friends outside of the church. I
Yeah.
mean, God calls people from all different walks of life and different personality styles and different backgrounds and different ways of different personalities. And so when you no longer have that in common, like
Mhm.
when you're no longer sharing the Sabbath together, when you're no longer sharing the holy days together, and maybe you're still keeping the holy days, but you're not at the same feast sites,
Mhm.
right? It becomes an out of sight, out of mind,
Yeah.
unfortunately, kind of situation. Even with friends that I have who are still in the same organization as me, who don't live near me, I have to actively work to keep those relationships going.
Mhm.
So we naturally default to just letting, time and distance erode a relationship. If the only thing that really connected us was our mutual membership in an organization. So
Yeah.
that is one probably big reason why. Like I have friends in all different organizations, but I have to actively work at keeping those relationships going, just like I have to with any other relationship. I
Mhm.
don't have any personal animosity towards them. I
Yeah.
just, we, I mean, when I think about friends I had in Worldwide, we have so little in common now
Mhm.
that it's like, what do we even talk about?
Yeah.
And some of those people who left Worldwide to go down the same path as Worldwide doctrinally, really more of a Protestant sort of path, they have a lot of animosity towards what they feel like was a cult and brainwashing. And so it makes it even more difficult to talk to people
Yeah.
who are anti everything you still believe. I
Yeah.
mean, some of them mock these beliefs.
Mhm.
So there's that. With the factions that are going on now, the different splinters, some of it is, I'm just not working hard to maintain those connections. Some of it is distrust. Some of it
Mhm.
is, I don't know, I don't know what to believe. I don't know who to believe. And this is where the chronic part of trauma comes in, right? Because now over the course of many, many years, we've seen the one organization splinter into, I don't even know how many there are now, well over 300.
Mhm.
And people go off on the seemingly the smallest things.
Yeah.
So it has changed the way people, I mean, it's sort of made us
Mhm.
cynical about maybe religion, cynical about the ministry at times, cynical about people's ability to be humble
Yeah.
with each other and treat each other with love and respect. Um, and of course, that starts at the individual level. But again, it's not this black and white thing. There are multiple faceted reasons for why we don't maintain these connections.
Mhm. Most definitely. Yeah.
And it really, it really, it's both a top down thing, but it's also a roots level thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So if from the top down you feel like it's not encouraged or supported for you to reach out to other organizations, and it's very important for you to do everything that your church leadership says to do, even if a part of you feels in a way like this isn't okay,
Mhm.
but you've been taught, like I was taught, the ministry really do no wrong. The
Yeah.
ministry were for me very much on a pedestal. The original split changed that for me, but not completely. It
Mhm.
was it was other life events in my life that sort of made me really really go, you know what, ministers are human and
Yeah.
they make mistakes. And I can't just trust everything that is said by a minister just because he's a minister.
Right.
But there is a generation of people in our church who still really live their life that way. A minister said to do this, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So if from the top down it's discouraged,
Mhm.
then that impacts what we do. But at a roots level, if a pastor is, encouraging brethren to, do fundraising activities together, in a combined effort with other, Church of God organizations, and or there's a multi-church organizational, church event, or
Yeah.
if at the roots level that's being encouraged, then it gives permission for those
Mm.
members to do that.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, I think your generation and younger are going to be a pivotal force for building this bridge, because what I see is a lot less tolerance
Mhm.
for this separatism,
Yeah.
if we can call it that.
Yeah. Most definitely. I think it's very interesting. Uh, I was reading actually Mystery of the Ages fairly recently.
Mhm. Yeah,
I've been kind of going back and reading some of the old like core
literature.
stuff that
Yeah,
I don't think I've just ever really sat down and read through it.
yeah,
And I actually pulled this to the side because it made me think of kind of what we're going through right now. And if it's okay, I'd love to read a quote from it that I thought was so
absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like this really relates well to what you were just talking about. So essentially, it says, it seems that few people really think. Most people accept carelessly what they're taught from childhood, and coming into maturity, they accept that which they have repeatedly heard, read, or been taught. They continue to go along, usually without question, with their peers. Most people do not realize it, but they have carelessly assumed what they believe without question or proof. Yet they will defend vigorously and emotionally their convictions. It has become human nature for people to flow with the stream, to go with the crowd, and to believe and perform like their peers around them. I just thought that was so profound. And it's so interesting that when he was writing this, I believe this was the last book that he ever wrote. I think he was in
Yeah.
his 90s. And it's just fascinating that from his perspective, this was coming from a people in the world, you know, this is what people do. They just if they're born into a culture, born into a religion, most people, they don't really second guess it. They just kind of go along with it and they don't question it. And he's encouraging, okay, people, like, think, use your thinking cap. And here we are, three, four
Yeah.
generations,
Yeah.
we're humans. And
We're
you know what I
human.
mean? It's
Yeah.
like we're kind of
Yeah.
we're now, it like
Yeah.
the church that he developed is now struggling with that same issue. And it's not because, like,
Yeah.
we're bad. I think it's just at a human basic fundamental level, we do
Yeah.
that. And I think at least my generation, and obviously like other generations too, but I'm seeing either people are in it because they've just always been in it and it's
Mhm.
just comfortable, and you were kind of raised and that's just, you go with the flow and it's just, I'm just going to stay here. Or something happens in life and they step back and they go, hold the phone, I really need to like reassess here, I need to decide, is this really what I believe? And think, and to delve deep into your belief system and get really firm. Okay, like, do I actually believe this? And do I align? Maybe even like if I'm with United or Cagua or Living or Independent or whatever, do I align 100% with them? And if not, is that a bad thing? You know, like just kind of working through all of those things. And I'm seeing people, my generation, kind of waking up to that, and really
Mhm.
the people that I just love and can have the coolest conversations with. I mean, all generations, honestly, but it's neat
Mhm.
having people in their 20s and 30s that are going through this process of really developing, okay, or stepping back and saying, this, what do I really believe and why do I believe it? And let me check the Bible, let me check resources, let me read things that aren't just in my organization and use
Yeah.
critical thinking. And I think that's where a lot of this is starting to develop, because people are starting to not just go along to get along. They're thinking deeply
They're
and
thinking
going,
for
okay,
themselves. Yeah.
yeah, and you have, once you get to that place, you start going, okay, like something's not
Mhm.
all the way right here. Like there are
Yeah.
all these amazing people who are in all of these different organizations. We're all clearly brothers and sisters in Christ. So how do we, you know what I mean? Like,
So how do we build this bridge?
how do we build this bridge? Because I feel like there's so many people who are just there. They're ready to start doing some work, and it's been
Yeah.
exciting, you know?
You know, each organization, a church is its own society, right? And so we've got society at large, but any organization you belong to is its own society, and societies have their own rules.
Mhm.
And and some of those are formal rules, some of those are informal. uh, Everybody knows them, but they're sort of unspoken rules. And another way of saying that is that each church has its own personality.
Mhm.
So there are slight variations in doctrines. I'd say the big three.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh,
there's
yeah, there
no
are.
question that there are some slight doctrinal differences. But what I see, which is so unfortunate, is that we focus on the differences. We don't focus on the similarities.
Mhm.
We are told constantly to be able to discern truth from error as it pertains to being out in the world. But we seem to be afraid that if we are exposed too much to those small doctrinal differences in these other groups, that we will perhaps be persuaded to go over there. And that logically doesn't really make sense. I mean, we're bombarded with far more error in the world than we are in these different church organizations. So I think there is absolutely a way for us to be able to love each other and build bridges with each other, and yet there still be room for those differences. And let's be realistic, none of these organizations are perfect, and within each of those organizations there are variations in people's individual interpretation of the scripture.
Yeah.
I would even step out on a limb to say that that's even true ministerially, because I've experienced that personally. When
Mhm.
I've gone to multiple ministers on a specific issue, I've gotten multiple contradictory responses.
Mm.
And so that's made me very aware that even on an individual level, we still have our own personal interpretation
Mhm.
of, and we're all on our own personal journey of how we interpret the scripture and apply it to our own lives. And that is filtered through our own personal experiences.
Mhm.
So, for example, if you go to one minister for marital advice, that's filtered through his own personal experiences with marriage.
Right.
It, okay. And every person he's ever helped through marriage, right? And his own childhood experiences through marriage. It can't help but be.
Mm.
So if one minister has a very loving wife, and has had a great marriage, and he grew up in a very happy, stable home, he has one perspective about marriage,
Mm.
that he sees the scriptures through that lens. You go to another minister who's married, but maybe behind closed doors, it's a toxic marriage, and or he grew up in a very toxic childhood. He sees the scriptures through that lens. So
Mhm.
you go to those two different ministers and you get marital advice, and you're going to hear different things, and
Yeah.
it's going to be confusing. You have to be able to think for yourself. And ultimately, the Bible is really the greatest love story that was ever written. It is about God's love for us.
Yeah.
And yes, a huge part of that is tough love, but at no point do I read in the Bible that God says we should divide ourselves into multiple groups because we don't know how to find a way to agree to disagree. It doesn't mean we have to worship together every
Yeah.
week, but there are other ways for us to be a family, to work out differences. We impress upon the membership that you need to work out differences within your family, within your
Mhm.
marriage, but we don't necessarily hear the same messages about working those differences out on a interorganizational level.
Yeah.
We just don't. And
Yeah.
yet that is biblical.
Mhm. No, it totally is. And I think that's that's one of the reasons why Church of God Network was kind of formed in the first place,
Yeah.
because it was like,
Yeah.
well, I think there was small grassroots effort thing, there was general people who were kind of acting as bridges, but I think I'm so excited that and grateful that Church of God Network started, because it is an opportunity to kind of hone in specifically on this issue, because it's like if we can't love each other first, how are
Yeah.
we supposed to be loving people out in
In
the
the world.
world?
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about this morning, knowing that I was going to be talking with you today. I mean, God's called us for a very specific purpose. We are being trained to, minister. I mean, the very definition of minister is to serve.
Yeah.
It's not to preach, it's
Yep.
to serve.
Mhm.
So we're being called to serve billions of people
Yeah.
who will for the first time be exposed to God's truth. And we better get our acts together, is all I can say. We better learn to treat each other with the kind of love that God expects us to show those billions of people who have been blinded by, the God of this world in the most horrendous, evil ways.
Mhm.
Uh, or God's not going to use us.
Yeah.
It really
Yep.
just comes down to that. God's not going to use
Honestly,
us. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think about that often, and even when we were talking before discussing this conversation last week, it's kind of like, are we gonna be in either the kingdom one day or the place of safety? And there's gonna be like, okay, if you're in, this church, you go here, and if you're
Right.
in United, go here. And it's like, no, he's gonna be like,
Yeah.
people, we gotta
Yeah.
figure it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah,
We're all
you
working
and I were
together
talking about the
here.
other day, like, are there going to be people with clipboards as you come into the, let's just say, for example, it is Petra. It's called Petra, by the way, everybody, not Petra. Let's say it's Petra, the place of safety. Are there going to be people with clipboards at the very narrow entrance of that? Because I've been there, going, okay, what organization are you in? Okay, you go to the north. Okay, all right, you go to the south, and here are the barriers, here are the boundary
Mhm.
lines, and we only cross these at certain times, and there's a curfew, et cetera. Like, come on.
Yep. Yep. I
we,
was
we, we
also
better figure out a way to be together before that time comes.
exactly. And I was just reading a book about the Gulag, actually,
Mm.
and from a Christian perspective as well, and just how persecuted they were. And it really struck me reading some of these because it's from the perspective of multiple different people who went through this. And as a Christian, they said essentially at the end of the day, all of the denominational differences, they didn't even matter anymore. Like
Yeah,
if you desired to have a relationship with God and you found someone who wasn't going to turn you in to the
yeah,
corrupt
yeah,
government and that you could pray with
yeah,
or maybe sing a hymn with or something, like that was just the most
yeah,
amazing gift,
yeah.
and I feel like I don't I don't want us to be there
But
before.
that, yeah,
I don't
that
like
is what's
I
going to happen,
really
though, Chantel.
I
You're
hope not.
absolutely right. We are, what we've gone through so far is nothing compared to what's coming. We know
Mhm,
that biblically, and going through something as severe as that, it has a way of melting away all these sort of divisions between us, because we will be looking for anybody and everybody who believes in our way of life. And it's not going to matter what organization they were in. So we can joke about, the clipboard situation with the place of safety, but the reality is we will have faced a huge trauma
mhm,
at that point, and we will be grateful to even just be able to be there.
yep,
And I don't doubt for a second that it's not going to matter to any of us at that point.
yeah,
But you're right. I hope it doesn't take that to finally dissolve the boundary
mhm,
lines between people.
yeah, absolutely. So with that being said, what do you think are some approaches that people could potentially take? Maybe healing on an individual level. What do you think from like a therapeutic perspective? What would that take in order, both individually and maybe even like from a congregational perspective, to
Yeah.
um, work towards that while we're still in a place where we're
Yeah.
not being like actively persecuted? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, absolutely. Well, I can only speak for me, in my life. I've always been willing through all of this, even through the turmoil I went through with my own parents. I was always willing to attend with them when I would visit them. I've been to two of their feast sites. I visited my parents just last month and went to services with them.
Mm.
For me, that was my way. Not that has never been reciprocated, but I let go of that a long time ago,
Yeah.
because again, I understand that there's a generational thing going on there, the way
Mhm.
they view um, their responsibility to the church. But I've always been willing to do that, and that has helped a lot. So
Mhm.
if you have family members in other organizations, it helps to be able to attend those other organizations so that you can make your own informed decision. You,
Mhm.
you can't make an informed decision by just listening to other people's opinions. You've got to be willing to go and hear and meet. And I've come to realize that just because I have an experience with my parents doesn't mean that that is the way that organization is. I've met incredibly lovely people in my parents' organization. I've heard messages that are spot on doctrinally.
Hmm.
There's a zeal for
Yeah.
God's work in that organization that is phenomenal.
Hmm.
There are, and I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't have gone.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that. A lot of us have people in other organizations. Um, if you are in a church area where your minister is open to this, the more you extend invitations to the other organizations, the more they will get the message that you are including them and inviting them.
Hmm.
But on an individual level, you can do the same thing in your home. You
Yeah.
can host dinners and events where you're cross-pollinating, for
Hmm.
lack of a better word. Bring in friends. The most recent split didn't happen so long ago that there aren't people in your current congregation that don't know people, in the United
Yeah.
congregation down the road, right? So you can host an event at your home where people get to see each other again.
Hmm.
That's what begins to soften people's hearts ultimately.
Yep.
Like, oh, I remember spending time with you and it was fun. And what's going on in your life and how are you doing? And we need that to
Hmm.
to to get some momentum built up.
Yeah.
Um, and we need to stop judging people, quite frankly, who
Hmm.
are willing to go around to different organizations to maintain relationships. Because unfortunately, this is a human tendency that we have to be like, you must pick an organization and you must stay in that organization or you are not loyal to the organization.
Hmm.
And yet we still on the other hand say, well, we're all part of God's church.
Yep.
Well, we can't have it both ways. We
Right.
can't be really denigrating of people who, as we label it sometimes, church hopping,
Hmm.
because they're trying to maintain relationships and yet say we're all brethren. We've got to be able to not speak out of both sides of our mouth. There's
Yeah.
got to be a way where we say, yeah, we have doctrinal differences, but we still love each other and
Hmm.
we're all on our own personal spiritual journeys. So,
Definitely. Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's funny that you bring up the church hopper thing. I think there's different perspectives or ways of going about saying it because I think there is a way of doing that that might not be as healthy, which is just literally every single weekend you're just hopping from place to place
Yeah.
to place and you don't really have,
You're not grounded in a, well, you
yeah,
can't
you're
be
not
involved, you can't
grounded.
serve. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, because then you don't have as much opportunity to go all in. And I think there is a healthy way to where you do have a home church. And
Mhm.
every now and again, you can go and visit maybe another organization congregation. Doesn't have to be every week, doesn't have to be every other week. It could be like
Right.
once every 3 months or something like
Right.
that, but it's still
Yeah.
something. And like you said, it's just there's so many ways that we can
Mhm.
lean into um just developing relationships with one another, even just the people who are right around the corner. There's people
Yeah.
like right now, my husband and I are attending living, and we have tons of Cagua brethren all around us. And
Around,
we
yeah,
hang out with them all the time
all the
because
time.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like they're our brothers and sisters in Christ, and it's the best thing ever. It's like our
Mhm.
family is just exponentially grown because we spend time with people who are in, United or Church of God Assembly. And there's all kinds of different people in our area in the Nashville metro. And it's such a gift because you might
Well,
maybe,
you've moved from one vibrant church community to another vibrant church area. Well,
yeah,
community, you can still say community.
yeah.
But that's the grassroots effort really that it
Hmm.
takes. When you are breaking bread, I mean, you think about the New Testament church, right?
Yeah.
And what bonded and united them. A lot of times it was breaking bread together. So
Hmm.
when you're breaking bread with people of the same faith, it's hard to feel antagonistic towards them because
Yeah.
they're in your home or you're in their home or wherever you are, you're sharing your life with them. So that's the
Mhm.
grassroots effort, that it needs to start with the individual. Stop,
Absolutely.
we need to stop, to the degree that we do, we need to stop viewing people as being different from us,
Mhm.
being maybe not our enemy, but somewhere in the middle of,
Yeah.
friend and foe,
Mhm.
and realize that we have far more in common, and we share the same calling and the same purpose. That should be a unifier,
Yep.
far more than it is right now.
Absolutely. And even going back to your point of, if we did, let's say you did talk to your minister, like, hey, we're having this event, could we open it up to other organizations? There's things like Church of God Network. We have the Ephesians 4 project, that if it's literally just like a financial issue, you can apply for a grant to get some money to help fund that event, which
That's
is
great. Wow,
awesome.
that's
Because then
awesome.
it's
Yeah,
like
that is
that
awesome.
lessens the difficulty, because sometimes it's
Mhm,
like, yeah, maybe we want to do it, but
mhm.
financially we can't afford to pay for all this food. It's not in our budget. So there are opportunities like that. If that's an issue, we never want money, to be the issue that
Right.
people can't
Yes,
put
yeah,
on an event. And it doesn't even have to be specifically like a, you know, Cogway event or whatever. It's just, even if you
yeah,
chose to put on an event, like
yeah,
that's something that you could
yeah.
apply for. Um, yeah. So,
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I want to say, I, I do see movement in the right direction. I mean, certainly, you know, even 6 years ago, I went to a church picnic in Dallas, and there were people there from United, and it was great. I mean,
mhm,
that's obviously something that the pastor was completely open to and allowing, and it was great to see them there, and they felt welcome, and they were engaged in conversation with people, and I see movement in the right direction for
mhm.
sure. I just think, being the pesky humans that we are, we just are slow moving, turtle slow.
Mhm. Yep.
So
But
anyway,
one step in the right direction, little by little. It's
yeah, yeah,
all we can do, and keep working on ourselves and just
yeah.
loving each other, honestly. Yeah. All right. Well, Debbie, thank you so much for coming on with us today. Also, tell us what courses you put together, and how people can follow you if they're
Oh,
interested.
okay. Well, the easiest way to follow me is through my website, which is just debbiecaudle.com. And it's a Caudle, Caudle, and everything that I offer there is right there. So, yeah, I don't want to promote myself too much here. You can go to the website, you can find all about me there. So, and thank
Awesome.
you very much. It was an honor to be able to come here and speak. And if it can help somebody, even just, incrementally, then it serves its purpose. So,
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Debbie.
Thank you, Chantel.